Yep.
All right, guys. We're gonna call the, Employees Retirement Board meeting to order. This would be March 22nd. The time is 6:47 p.m. First up, guys, we're gonna consider and approve the minutes of the last, regular meeting from January 25th, 2023. I know it was sent to you. If somebody, would care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Approve
Approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Dr. Mahoney, second. All, in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
It looks unanimous. Any opposed or abstain? Okay. All right, let's move forward. So we've got a bunch of retirements this evening to approve. I was going to save this introduction for later, but I'll do it twice. I'd like to introduce to the board our new recording secretary, Doreen Fiolic. This is her maiden voyage with us.
Yes.
She's gotten some great instruction. We'd like to thank Chris Otamazo for her many years of service, and we wish her great success. Typically, Doreen, in this case, we would review the pensions that are before us, and we would be able to ask questions of the HR department, but we don't have HR department represented with us, right? Okay. So, guys, we are going to rely on the paperwork that we have and the backup that we have, and that each of these retirements are normal. I hope you've each had a chance to look through the specifics. If you'd like a few minutes, we can do that. Right? I took a look at each of them. If you guys want to take a minute or two, since they're normal, I suggest that what we can do is we can approve them in the two different bunches. So one would be the retirement for the BOE employees, Susan Dowling, Virginia Minetti, Molly D'Amico, Elizabeth Noble, first, and then we'll go to the town. Okay. When ready, someone would care to make a motion on that. Do you want more time to study the numbers or see the numbers? If you haven't seen them, I printed them out.
I'll make the motion. It's the Board of Ed is the...
This is the BOE employees.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion approved, a second. Okay. Do we, should we take the matter to a vote? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay. Let's move on to the next ones. These are to review and approve the normal retirements for town employees. This would be for Virginia Pauls and for Kevin Fox. These are both normal retirements. I could ask for a motion. Again, we don't have the HR here to answer questions. They're all normal. Would you like to make a motion?
I will make a motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Eric will second. Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Okay. With that, thank you, they've been approved. I don't believe we have any old business. I just would request, since last time we pulled the monthly meeting, we couldn't get a quorum. That's why we're approving so many tonight. This is my plea to make yourself available for that 10-minute meeting that would happen every month unless it's canceled, so we can move them in a orderly fashion. On a new business front, I'd like to kind of give an opportunity for public comment. There was an item that came up that came to my attention that Eric Caliper has researched. There was a clerical error that happened regarding the COLA assessments that was identified by the town, but without having HR here to address it, I feel like we're not being able to have a very fulsome conversation about it, but I would very much like to open this for public comment because we have a member of the public with us. Could you state your name?
My name is Michael Zimbrowski. I worked for the town for 41 years, 40 years, 9 months, 21 days, and I took the voluntary or the retirement package in 2020, and I was notified this week about the COLA error. And basically, they charged us, they gave us a 5.7% rate instead of a 3% rate, compound interest. Other union people wanted to know who made the error. And also, they want us to pay it back. They're penalizing us by paying interest on it. And also, since 3/4 of the fiscal year has passed, July 1st, they could take subtract the 3% from the 5.7 and just give us a 3.3% instead of a 0.3%, because it's 2.7% that they overpaid us supposedly. So just subtract that from the July 1, and they would be able to recoup that, push that over, and they'd recoup that from their current fiscal year, July 1.
You want, I can speak to this a little bit?
If you would?
Yeah, because I think you pointed out what we've heard anyway, to be the major pushback was the interest piece of it.
Plus, they said that we had to pay it back, and that lump sum was a good chunk of change doing that. Plus, I'll be in Aruba April 1st when I get and I was counting on having some spending money.
So I'll say two things. With regards to the interest piece, that's, I know that HR, implemented that per the guidance of the IRS. That's what the IRS says it's properly due in a situation like this. And as far as the lump sum, I know that they did include in there, if it's a hardship, if it presents a hardship for anyone to, pay this back in the lump sum, talk to HR, and they'll work out, they will work out a plan to work it out, so it's not such a big deal, so.
Yeah. I spoke to an auditor, and they said that the percentage, the interest, that is not mandatory. It said that the town could charge it, but they don't have to.
Yeah,
and my issue was, who made the error? Now, we're being penalized.
right.
So that was my,
And so,
that was my position too, with my guys.
so
Sorry.
you know, I guess I would look at it as, if an error were made in the other direction, then we would have to, you know, the town would have to make that right with the employee.
May I, a couple of things.
Yeah.
One, I'm sure you're not prepared with this. Do you know the sum total of the error?
I don't, and it would depend, it would vary from person to person. I think there were, 21 people who were affected by it. It was most of the Barrett people, right?
Correct.
It was a Barrett.
And so, Thea and,
Yeah.
if you.
Okay.
BOE.
So I'd like to understand what the total exposure is of the error to the town. Wanted to just get a sense for the size of this.
Yeah, we can get that.
Okay.
We can get that.
And then I would like to understand kind of where the error kind of came from, whose error it was.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, we can try to pinpoint which person it was. It was, you know, a different makeup of people in HR at the time, because it was the personnel that were in HR at the time that that Barrett was passed. So, we can take a look at that.
And also when I said that since we were paid 2.7% over July 1st, instead of giving us a 3% or whatever the COLA is, just give us a 0.3 to even out the 3%, the 2.7.
Yeah, and that's something, I think that's something that I don't know what conversation you had with HR, but, you know, I would think that they could work out some kind of, situation like that where they could spread out the recouping of the.
Well, it was not the recouping. You could just take, the recouping would be basically paying us, instead of the 3%, paying us for the new COLA July 1, paying us 0.3, because it's 2.7 we were overpaid.
Right.
So the 0.3 would make it 3%, and that would be,
Right.
and they weren't budgeting the money.
Just pull it out over time, right, rather than it be a lump sum.
Right.
The only thing I would recommend is there'd have to be some kind of correction factor on the next COLA. because when you add the COLA to that base amount, it's not gonna be the true base amount, so just be aware of that. Just one thing I wanna
Yeah.
bring up is that, like I said, we do have employees that are still in the town pension fund that are not in the police fire pension fund. My employee was not a VERB employee, was affected by this. And I have to say that, again, it was not so much the error, which I'm still trying to research to make sure that there was an error on my employee's part, but the interest, the fact that either the town or Millman made an error here, because we really are paying Millman to do this stuff.
To do
now.
this, right.
So I wanna know where that kind of fell through, and that the fact that.
What do you wanna know, what
So-
fell through?
So where, when we talk about where the error happened, was it in Millman's processing of it? Because it should be Millman doing that. Or was it the town's error? But regardless, I don't think that, whether it's Millman's error or the town's error, that they should be charging retiree interest.
Didn't this predate Milliman, or not? When
This
did
COLA was, well, I don't know.
Oh, it's just the COLA from this past year?
The COLA, I think, was as of July first.
Okay, okay.
July first,
Where we-
2022.
Where we were in, you know, HR was in transition and
Mhm.
a lot of new staff coming on at the time, so.
So it's 20 or so people,
I think it's
2.7%
21, the number
for
there.
3 quarters,
Yeah.
almost 4 quarters maybe, almost.
What's the interest rate, do you know?
And so I was gonna just say, not to diminish it, but the interest amount, you know, when you talk about the full exposure to the town and what's being recouped, the interest piece of it is pretty small in, you know, by comparison, so.
Because there's gonna be a cost to go back and unwind this from however they're going to do it, from man hours and dealing with Milliman and auditing and accounting, that might surpass what that amount is, just tossing that out there.
That's
Yeah.
a fair point too.
Right, to adjust it,
Mm-hmm.
right, to come back, right.
So quick question, I'm a little confused, I'm on police and fire force
Yeah.
first. It sounds like the firefighters and the cops might be affected by this or not. Do we know for, it sounds like we don't know for sure, is that fair? Is that what I heard?
I've only received one letter from one retiree who was covered underneath the town side plan, not the police fire plan.
And just out of curiosity, I'm a little confused, why would you?
It was very convoluted.
Okay.
The employees were part of the Public Works Union, and because their work more simulated to the fire service, they came over into our bargaining unit, but they retained their rights to the town side pension fund.
Okay.
So actually, in fact, when we say that the town side pension fund is closed, it's not closed to new entrants.
Okay, so I'd like to read the email that I received from the town from the HR, okay, from Megan Brandt. You know, I want to make you aware of a pension administration correction we are currently working on. Due to the annual pension valuation audit with Milliman, which would have just happened, right? It was discovered that 20 town retirees, July 1, 2022 cost of living adjustment, COLA, was erroneously applied at the biannual rate of 5.7% rather than the annual rate of 3.0%. We consulted with Richard Cohen from Shipman and Goodwin, the legal firm, regarding the self-correction process and proceeded accordingly. We have notified retirees of the error and the proposed correction last week via letter. Okay?
Carol, could I, when you say is it semi-annual or biannual?
So she wrote here biannual, but
That
I
sounds
think she
surprising.
means semi-annual.
Okay, all right.
I would think, right?
It sounds like.
Biannual, every 2 years would not make sense,
No,
right? That
maybe
would
not.
be semi-annual,
Sure
right,
is.
okay, so, look, I don't think we're gonna be in a position to be able to solve anything, right? Here, I don't think we have the right people around the table, right? I think it's really important that we know about this. I think your request is really reasonable, to not have to turn around and write a check back for all of this. I think that that's too abrupt, and I would like to think that we could find, a solution that, you know, allows you to, allows you to go on vacation.
Tom Connolly asked me he couldn't attend tonight, so he asked me, he was gonna come here, and I thought a few other,
Yeah.
community members were gonna be here, but
So would it be all right with you, if you allow us to kind of huddle up?
Absolutely, yeah.
And, you know, firstly, on behalf of the whole Pension Town Milliman process, I apologize for the error. We shouldn't be making errors like that. Thank you for being patient with us. And let's see if we can come up with a solution that fits within the bounds of the IRS, right? We have to follow their rules, and that allows us to not put an undue abrupt burden upon you.
Okay, yeah. That's fine, thank you for hearing me tonight. I appreciate it.
It's helpful, yeah.
Very helpful,
Yeah.
very helpful.
Does the IRS state a rate, or is it, or the town, the pension board needs to come up with a rate? The rate,
The interest rate?
yeah,
I can't speak to this
right.
situation in particular, but I know, you know, typically we would follow what's in state statute. So I don't know what the
And the question
actual rate
is, we had a
that they
rate
apply.
increase, a significant rate increase, is it a variable rate, is it a fixed rate?
Right.
Coded, well, you know, at this point in
Sure.
time, when you retired, rates were very low, 2 years ago. Today it's very different, so.
This is probably not necessarily, this is not necessarily relevant, but I had a settlement in New York State, and the state government in New York anyway had a specified rate for each period. So if Connecticut does the same thing, it should be,
And I
it should be
guess,
a schedule.
Yeah.
and are we going by federal rates, you know,
Right.
federal law, state law, or town law?
Well, yes, it's a lot.
Yeah,
It,
something
this
can't be
is,
resolved
you know,
tonight.
it's an easy mistake. I think it might be a complex solution. And I think we just have to find all of the pieces, right? But I think the important thing is not to create too much of an abrupt burden, right? But allows us to kind of all correct the error.
Right.
Just for background, how much are we talking about per retiree?
Well, that's what I
It's
asked.
gonna-
I need
it's
to
gonna
make it
depend,
very.
you know, I can get that.
Even roughly, I mean, we're talking,
24,000,
okay, so we're talking tens of thousands of dollars.
24,000 for 20 employees, maybe.
Each, or 24,000 total?
Total, yeah.
Oh, total.
Yeah, yeah.
I know, we might be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, you're
Let's,
getting the
I can
additional
get that.
auditors may cost more than.
I was gonna
let
say,
us, let us come back, let us assess the
Yeah.
solutions, we can call a meeting, okay? We can call a meeting very quickly with 5 days' notice, we don't have to wait for, 3 months from now. But allow us to fact find, right?
Yeah, and the response from the retirees, at least from what I've heard, has been, you know, they've been very reasonable about it
Mhm.
Yeah.
and cooperative. It's, I think it's been the interest piece that has been
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
major
just-
component.
One quick question, the VERP program, when did that take effect? What were those dates?
That would have been,
19?
January 2021.
Just January 1st, 2021.
Okay.
The first
All right.
day.
I'm trying to think, like, what would that retirement date be that you would qualify for the first year COLA? That's why I'm asking.
But we'll find out.
Yeah, there's a lot of fact finding.
There's a lot of fact finding, there's just a lot of math, it's a spreadsheet, right? So we'll do the spreadsheeting, and we'll figure it out.
Great.
Okay? Okay?
Yeah, in the meantime, we'll ask you not to go to the Caribbean until we get this settled.
Sorry. My wife's so back.
Yeah, have a great vacation.
I was sympathetic to you.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, we've got some homework to do. Thank you for
Thank you.
reviewing it with us. All right, if nothing else, guys, I'm gonna move to adjourn. Okay, all in favor of adjourn, we're done. All right,
Okay.
with that, boom, here we go, with the magic of technology. I'm gonna call to order the JRIB meeting. This is, March 22nd, the time is 7:06 PM. Welcome, hi, Brian.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah, you guys are- yeah, what time do you have to head out?
Probably like 10.
Okay, so guys, we are unfortunately, we are double booked, our town's double booked tonight. Board of Finance is having its meeting. Milliman, who'll be presenting the actuarial report for us tonight, has to go present to the Board of Finance tonight too,
Oh, wow.
right? And so, Jared will have to leave in like 10 minutes because he's gonna have to usher the Board of Finance. So we're having one of those kind of March nights. All right, let me get my agenda.
Do we have to move the schedule around to put Millman in first, or do we have to move the schedule around to put Millman in first? Then you go to the board of.
We have Milliman in first.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, no, that, Milliman is first. So the order of the evening, right,
Yeah,
will be
and
Milliman first,
As we're wrapping up, I will
call principal,
call principal, and they're dialing in.
okay? And then we'll do Vanguard.
No.
Okay, so, and Jen, we decided that, well, we love having Jen with us in person. Having her attend the 2 meetings and the difficulty of when she goes on to the Board of Finance, we would just say, just stay here at the beauty of your screen. We thought we'd be the kinder, gentler town.
I appreciate it.
All right, guys, bear with us 1 second. Jared is helping Doreen with her screen here for a second. So, while I have the whole board together, I'm just gonna kind of kick us off and say welcome to Doreen Fiolik, who is our new recording secretary. Chris, after 4 years, Chris wishes you well. Chris loves everyone. She says, tell them I love them. And she looks forward to seeing you around town. We are incredibly grateful for the effort that she gave us and her steady hand. We are at a new day. I think it starts at we don't have the Milliman piece in the backup? We do.
Is it not in the backup?
I saw the Vanguard.
I did not.
It's 120-something pages.
I did not see the.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
I can share if it's easier.
I think we're gonna have
That'd be
to
great.
do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all the
Okay.
other backups in here. That'd be
All
great.
right, so we are just pulling down. So guys, let's quickly here, let's move on to the minutes. For item number 2 here, to hear, consider, and approve the minutes of the regular JRIB meeting, January 25th, 2023. All right? Somebody would like to make a motion when you are
I
ready?
just have a minor correction.
Yeah?
I just want to get some, more granularity on the CFO report. So in that meeting, we talked about the cash flow of the current employees' contributions. And the CFO reported that those contributions are made to the pension fund on January and June, every 6 months. And that we asked to look into the accounting, the legal, and the investments of how that cash account is managed. And then we discussed about what that interest rate would be in a rising rate environment for the pension fund. And I think that was supposed to be part of what the audit team was supposed to report back on.
Right. And I'm assuming we can talk about that at our next JRIB meeting.
Yeah, when we do the next.
Because I know
Yeah,
you have
yeah,
the Board of Finance waiting for you, so why don't we incorporate all of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? This thorough analysis of the cash.
Yep.
That work?
Very good.
Would you please note that for the minutes, that will become an agenda item for the next meeting? Okay, part of the CFO's report is an extended CFO's report, okay? That addresses specifically the cash from the contributions. Okay,
I'll make a motion to approve with the recorded changes.
okay, do we have a second? Tom Collmore seconds. Okay, guys, can you hear us all in favor of approving the minutes with the changes? Please say aye. Aye. Okay, anyone want to oppose or abstain? All right, that's it, carries unanimously. Okay, Jen, thank you. If you could kindly share your screen, we're gonna let you, take it away. This will be the, so this is point number 3, agenda item number 3, to hear and discuss the annual actuary review of pensions and OPEB funds, with our actuary, Milliman.
Okay, can everyone see? Can we see my screen?
Can.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here tonight. I wish I could be in person, but I do appreciate the accommodation to make things logistically a little easier for me tonight. So today I'm going to go over our review of the Town of Fairfield's pension plans as well as the OPEB plans. I'll go through the the pension plans first. So on the pension side, we perform pension valuations on an annual basis. Every July 1st, we collect updated membership information as of that date, and we review any events that happened in the past year, as well as asset performance and how those things impact the plan's funded status. Also, as part of the valuation, we monitor trends over the past several years, look at assumptions, and then calculate a liability for the future promised benefits to plan participants, and in turn calculate the contribution the town should be making to the pension plans to be able to pay those promised benefits. So on this slide, we have a 5-year history of the plan population for both plans. On the left-hand side, we have the police and fire plan, and the town plan is on the right-hand side. You can see in the police and fire plan, the active population is fairly level. This plan is still open to new hires, so it is expected to remain fairly constant over time. And you can see those that are in pay, the light blue shaded parts of the bar at the bottom is increasing as active members retire over time. On the right-hand side, you can see that that for the town plan, the dark blue section, the active members, that count is decreasing. The town plan has been closed to new entrants for roughly about 10 years, depending, each union has a different date in which it closed, but on average about 10 years for the last 10 years. So that membership will continue to decline, and the in-pay membership of those lighter blue sections will continue to increase as active members terminate employment. On this page, we have a distribution of the active membership in both plans based on age and service. For the police and fire plan, for both plans, it's fairly evenly distributed across a variety of age and service. But a police and fire plan being open and having newer hires, you see a lot more people in the earlier age bands and younger age bands and earlier years of service. The eligibility for the police and fire is age 51 with 25 years of service for police, 51 and 25, or 30 years of service for fire. Generally speaking, is around about 10% of the active population on the police and fire plan is eligible to retire as of the last valuation date. So a fairly low percentage relative to the total active population. Over on the town plan, you see that the age in service is more heavily weighted towards higher ages, older ages and higher years of service. That's because the town plan is closed. So as time goes on, this plan will continue to mature and have an older population with longer years of service. You can see there's a couple random people with low service that might at first not make sense because the plan has been closed for quite some time. But there are some people that were hired part-time, but then later became eligible to enter the plan. So they don't have the full 10 years of service yet. So that explains those few people off to the far left-hand side. Moving on to the plan assets. These graphs show both the market value of assets in the lighter green bars on the left-hand side of each chart, and the actuarial value of assets in the darker green bars. For those of you who are not familiar with asset smoothing, for purposes of determining the plan's contribution, we calculate an actuarial value of assets, which gradually recognizes investment gains and losses over a 5-year period. This is to help reduce the volatility in the plan and the contributions that the town needs to make to the plans. I want to bring your attention to the last 2 years. As you know, the market has been quite volatile over the last 2 years. We had strong returns in fiscal year 21 with investment losses in fiscal year 22. So you can see that in fiscal year 22, the actuarial value of assets is larger than the market value of assets for both plans by about $12 or $13 million. And that's because we've only recognized 20% of the losses in fiscal year 22, and we've deferred the other 80% to future years. What that means is that absent any future gains or losses or any offsetting market gains, as those losses are recognized in the actual value of assets over the next several years, that will exert upward pressure on the town's contribution requirements as we recognize those losses. And this page kind of is a good graphical representation as to exactly why we smooth assets. You can see these the darker green boxes are the returns on a market value basis. These are average returns for both plans. The assets are invested in one large trust, but they are allocated separately to the town plan and in the police and fire plan, and the cash flows result in a slightly different return based on our calculations. But on average, these are the returns for the plans. And you can see in the last 2 years the volatility from a 26.5% return to a negative 9% return this past year. But you can, if you look at this lighter green line, this is a much smoother number, not bouncing around as much. And this is exactly why we smooth assets for purposes of calculating the contributions. Moving on to the funded status of both plans. You can see on the right-hand side that the funded ratio for both plans has remained pretty much level from last year to this year. On the police and fire side, there were more retiree deaths than expected, and there were twice as many retirements as expected. This is the second year in a row that we've had a number of retirements. Both of those events produced gains on the liability. But those were mostly offset by cost of living adjustments that were larger than expected. We assume a 2.5% cost of living adjustment year over year, and as you know, inflation is extremely high right now, and so therefore the cost of living adjustments were higher than we expected this past couple of years.
So Jen, when you talk about a gain in the liability, can you?
Yes. Yeah, so a gain in liability means the liability didn't grow as much as we expected. So the liability was lower than we expected it to be due to retiree deaths and more retirements than expected. But then the cost of living adjustments caused the liability to increase more than expected. So they pretty much offset each other. Overall, the liability on the police and fire side was about 1% higher than we expected it to be based on our assumptions last year. So all in all, pretty much where we thought it would be.
Okay.
And that's just due to the nature of offsetting of different forces and factors. On the town side, again, the overall liability landed pretty much where we expected it to be. There were, again, lots of retirements and deaths, but not as many as there were last year. Last year, there was a large number of retirements and deaths. There were still a lot this year, but not as many as last year. But that did produce a gain to the liability, so the liability did not increase as much as expected as a result of that activity. But again, the cost of living adjustments were larger than expected, and that pretty much offset the gains resulting from the retirements and the deaths. So again, the overall liability was almost exactly where we expected to be. So you see in the bottom left-hand side, the police and fire liability is up to $256 million, and the town liability is up to $264 million. So despite the poor investment returns in fiscal year 22, the funded ratios did remain level, and that's primarily because of the liabilities did what we thought they would do, and we are smoothing assets for purposes of calculating this funded ratio. So all the investment losses in fiscal year 22 are not fully recognized here. Again, absent any future gains, we would expect the funded ratio to deteriorate a bit over the next few years as investment losses are recognized in the actual value of assets.
Jen, just a quick question on the last slide. Those are actuary funding ratios, right? Not market value and...
Correct. So the market value funded ratios would actually be lower, because again, if I go back to a couple slides, you see the market value of assets are lower as of July 1st, 2022.
Yep, thank you.
So putting the assets and the liabilities together, we come up and determine the actuarially determined contribution for the towns. The actuarially determined contribution is made up of three components. The first being what we call the normal cost, and that is the value of benefits expected to be earned by active employees over the course of the next year. So what we expect people to earn. The second component is an amortization of the unfunded accrued liability. So we compare the assets and the actuarial value of assets to the plan liability, and that shortfall is amortized over a period of time. As of July 1st, 2022, that period is 19 years. It's a declining period. Last year it was 20, so this year it's 19. Next year it'll be 18, and so on and so forth. And the third component is a small interest component to take into account the time lag between when the calculation is determined and when the town actually makes the contribution into the trust. For both plans, actually, for the police and fire plan, the normal cost was slightly higher this year than it was last year. And that's expected to happen as the population gets older. It's an active open group, so the normal cost tends to slightly increase as salaries increase and service increases for everybody. But the amortization of the unfunded liability was also slightly higher. That's mainly due to the investment losses and the small liability losses I talked about on the previous page. Excuse me. As a result, the police and fire contribution went up from 6.7 million to 7 million this year, so up $300,000. On the town side, the normal cost component of the contribution decreased by about almost $300,000, and the reason for that is that the town plan is closed, so the active population is shrinking. Therefore, with time, we expect the normal cost to continue to shrink. So that's expected, and the amortization of the unfunded liability was slightly higher as a result of a higher unfunded liability due to the investment losses. But all in all, the decrease in the normal cost was greater than the increase in the unfunded liability, the amortization of the unfunded liability. Therefore, you can see that the town plan contribution actually decreased by about $100,000 from 5.1 million to $5 million.
Jen, I've got a question that's really just curiosity. When you do your actuarial projections, do you look at for married people, for example, do you look at the age of the retiree as well as his or her spouse, and you do a joint probability, because the spouse has survivor benefits, as I understand it. Do you dig into that level, or do you use rules of thumb? How do you approach that kind of complexity?
Yeah, so for retirees who have elected a joint and survivor annuity, therefore their spouse will receive a death benefit upon their death, we collect the actual spouse's date of birth and put that in and take that into consideration. For active employees who have not yet retired, we use an assumption as to what the age difference between the spouse and the retiree will be. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this page because we talked about the interest rate assumption back in July. We were at 6.9% as of July 1st, 2022, and we're sticking with that right now as well. This page shows, the top part of the page shows a distribution of the plan's investment allocation. Each colored dot represents a different asset class. The larger the dot, the higher the allocation to that particular asset class. And where the dot falls on the graph determines the return, expected return versus the expected riskiness, standard deviation of that particular asset class. The black dot in the middle represents your current portfolio and the risk profile associated with that. Of course, in any given year, the plan's investment return can range from a very high return, like it was last year, to a very low return, like this past year. But as we look at investment returns over time, they tend to gravitate towards the 50th percentile, this black number in the middle. And when we're talking about pension plans, we're talking about a long time horizon, so we tend to look to the 30-year horizon there. So based on Milliman's capital market assumptions as of June 30th, 2022, in your plan's target allocations at that point in time, the expected return that we come up with is 6.9%, which is exactly what we're using for our interest rate assumption, our return assumption. So you're right where you want to be with respect to the interest rate assumption.
Oh, how often does that happen?
I know.
Right on the button, okay.
All right, and these last two pages is everything in my I've presented, but just as the detailed numbers for people who are interested in the detailed numbers. We have the 2021 results with the 2022 results right next to it. It's the nitty-gritty details. I can go through it if there's interest, but it's pretty repetitive based on what I've already covered.
You know, so I have a question regarding kind of as you think about adjusting your framework going forward, the look forward, right? Looking at the interest rate. We've had such a change in rates, such a change in expected returns, perhaps. When does that get picked up into your mathematical calculations?
So we look at it on an annual basis, and our Milliman updates their capital market assumptions on twice a year. So we look at that and take into account the most up-to-date information. Now, a year ago, I came and didn't say that 6.9% was what our assumed return should have been. It was much lower. But as we know, with inflation being high, and then Brian can probably speak more to this, with inflation being high currently and the Fed doing what it's doing with interest rates, the market has responded to that. And the forward, while the returns have been poor recently, the forward-looking expectation is much more optimistic than it was. But that being said, even if we came back with a 7+% expectation, I wouldn't recommend to change that. We don't want to overreact to short-term fluctuations and changes. We want to make sure that we know what the new normal is. We don't quite know what that is just yet. So quite honestly, regardless of what the analysis said this year, I probably would have recommended 6.9% either way. But we just happened to hit the nail on the head with our analysis this year.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions with respect to the pension plans before I move on to the OPEB plans? All right.
Nope, forward.
Okay, so let me just get the OPEB presentation up.
As you're doing that, will you be doing the same presentation for the Board of Finance, or will you be delivering separate numbers? Or separate
The exact same presentation. I was tempted to hit record on this one and just play it for them, but. All right, can you see my OPEB presentation? Is it on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is going to look very similar to the pension presentation. It just has the OPEB numbers. We do the exact same work for the OPEB plans that we do for the pension plans. The one difference being that we only calculate OPEB. We only do the OPEB valuation every other year. So, and we do it in even years. So we calculate the membership data. We capture the membership data as of July 1st of the even years, and we're just doing the same analysis that we do for the pension plan. We're just looking at a 2-year period instead of one. So again, moving on to the plan population. One thing to note on here is that the 2018 and 2020 results are from the Hooker and Holcomb reports. You'll see if you look at the lighter blue numbers, you see a drop in both plans from last year to this year. That seems to be quite large. Hooker and Holcomb included spouses and beneficiaries of retirees in their member and pay status count. We don't do that because what we're trying to capture is the number of insurance contracts that exist, not each person that's covered. So our counts are a little bit inconsistent with theirs, but overall, the contracts that are being represented are consistent from one valuation to the next. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention there. Both of the OPEB plans are open to new hires, so you see that the active population is fairly steady from year to year, and the retiree population is also fairly steady. The difference between pension and OPEB is that not everybody the pension plan is a benefit that everybody's going to get as long as they've worked the required number of years to become vested. On the OPEB side, that's not necessarily the case. People sometimes terminate prior to becoming eligible for OPEB and therefore will never receive an OPEB benefit. So the population demographics are a little bit different as a result. Moving on to the active membership, the distribution for the police and fire plan is going to be very similar to the pension plan because again, this is an open group. We did notice that the population wasn't exactly the same, and it was probably only off by a handful of people. So we've made a note to investigate that further next year. But generally speaking, the distribution for the police and fire plan is pretty close to the distribution for the pension plan as well. However, on the town side, the pension plan has been closed to new members for quite some time, but the OPEB plan is still available to new hires. Therefore, you can see that there's a much heavier distribution to these earlier years of service and these younger ages than there was in the pension plan. So the maturity, the OPEB plan is not nearly as mature as the pension plan is. Moving on to the plan assets, unlike the pension plans, the OPEB plans were not currently smoothing assets for purposes of calculating the actuarially determined contribution for the OPEB plans. And the reason for that is the plans haven't been all that well funded up until now. You created a trust some years ago and you've been slowly building it up. The town plan's about 50% funded, the police and fire plan's about 40% funded. So we're getting to the point where it makes sense to start considering doing asset smoothing. But I didn't want to recommend that this year because it's not ideal to introduce asset smoothing in a down investment year because you'd rather just get those out of the way and not have build in that upward pressure on the contributions going forward. So therefore, we're only using market value of assets for purposes of the OPEB plan. More likely than not, when we do the July 1st, 2024 valuation, we will explore with you the possibility of asset smoothing for purposes of the OPEB contributions. Therefore, because we're using market, you can see that the investment losses in 2022 have caused the market value of assets to drop a bit from 21 to 22. On the investment return side, this graph looks a lot like the graph that we saw for the pension plan. There was some stability for a few years, but then the last couple of years have been pretty volatile. But because for purposes for the OPEB plan, the liability number is much larger than the asset number. So these swings are not as impactful for the OPEB plan as it would be for a plan that's much better funded. If your OPEB plan was 80 or 90% funded, these swings without asset smoothing would be difficult. But because the plans are only at 40-50% funded, it's not nearly as impactful. But again, we're going to start looking at asset smoothing in the near future. Moving on to the funded status of the plan. You can see that the funded ratio has been steadily increasing for both plans over the last several years. On the police and fire side, there was a small liability loss, so the liability increased more than expected due to just general plan experience, retirements, deaths, elections that retirees are making for their insurance plans. However, when we analyze the expected future healthcare costs of the plan, Milliman's health actuaries analyze the insurance plans that are being utilized and come up with projected costs for the plans. The cost for the pre-65 plans, so for people before they're eligible for Medicare, increased by about 20%. And the projected cost for the Medicare supplement plan, so people that are post-65 that are on Medicare but have a supplemental plan through the town, those decreased by 16%. So they kind of balance each other out. The liability is pretty evenly, is about 40% of the liability is attributable to the pre-65 plans, 60% to the post-65. So at the end of the day, there was a slight loss as a result of the updated healthcare analysis by about 2% or so. This loss was increased even ever so slightly as a result of the expected medical inflation, our update to that assumption. That's mainly driven by the short-term current inflation environment, which is driving long healthcare inflation as well. And then we also lowered the interest rate from 7% to 6.9% as discussed previously to be consistent with the pension plan. But all in all, the liability was pretty much where we expected it to be. It was slightly about 3% higher than we expected to be, but not too far off. That's for the police and fire side plan. On the town side, we saw the same analysis with respect to the pre-65 and post-65 plans, except for on the town side, most of the liability is weighted to the post-65 Medicare supplement plan, and the reason for that is that the retirement age for OPEB eligibility on the town side is at least age 62, 59 and a half if you're a public works employee, but 62 for everybody else. Whereas on the police and fire side, they can retire as early as age 51. So police and fire retirees are on those pre-65 plans for a much longer period of time than the town employees. And so the gains on the post-65 plan resulted in an overall liability gain on the town side of about 13%. So the liability went down much more than we were expecting it to do. This was partially offset by higher healthcare inflation and lowering the interest rate from 7% to 9%. But overall, the total liability on the town side was about 10% lower than we expected based on last year's assumptions. And that's why you can see.
Another question.
Sure.
Another question, just out of curiosity. Do you have one massive model that does the pension projections as well as the OPEB projections? So if I'm an individual in the model, my longevity affects both my probability of getting a pension for a certain length of time as well as receiving post-retirement health benefits?
That's correct. Yeah. So we have a model that projects out future events for each individual in each plan, the probability of retiring at different ages or dying or what have you, and we do that for each individual person, and then we add it all up to get the total liability for the plan. So moving on to the funded ratio at the bottom right-hand part of the screen, you can see the town's funded ratio improved at a higher clip than the police and fire's funded ratio, and that's because the town just experienced a better liability experience because of those post-65 plans being the main driver of the town liability. But both have increased despite the market losses, primarily because, and part of that, and remember these funded ratios are from 2020 to 22, so built into that are the gains in fiscal year 21, which were then mitigated by the losses in fiscal year 22. So that's part of the reason for that increase as well. Moving on to the actuarially determined contribution. On the police and fire side, we see a steady increase in the contribution year over year. And that's expected with an open plan that whose liability is behaving as we expect it to do, like I just mentioned in the previous slide. The police and fire contribution went up by about $300,000 from last year to this year, more so than it increased in previous years, but part of that is attributable to the market loss of fiscal year 22 as well. It did result in a higher unfunded liability, therefore a bigger amortization of that liability as a result. Moving on to the town side, you can see the significant liability gain that we experienced in this most recent year is the main reason for the decrease in the actuarially determined contribution from 4.2 million last year down to 3.6 million this year. Moving on to the interest rate assumption, this slide looks a lot like the slide for the pension plan, except that the target allocations for the OPEB plan are slightly different. There's a slightly higher allocation to equity than fixed income, but so that results in an overall expected return of 7.4%. But to be consistent with the pension plan, we've moved the discount rate to be down to 6.9%. This year, which is a very conservative assumption, and it's a good place to be, given that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And I think you're in a great place as far as the interest rate assumption is concerned for the near future. And again, those last two pages just show the numbers, the detailed numbers for each plan that I've already covered in our previous slides. So with that, I'll open up to any other questions you may have.
Any questions?
None.
Jen, this is really insightful, right? Eric, do you have a question?
Just, we used to get some projections, for future contributions. I didn't see a slide like that in the slide deck for either the OPEB or the pension. Is that something that you could do for us the next evaluation?
Yeah, that'll be part of our standard valuation report, the big report that we'll put together. It's just that I just didn't include it here in our presentation tonight.
Okay. Okay. Great. And then the next time we'll see you will be in July, right? When we actually go into the details of the discount rate, right? And then maybe perhaps you can do it. I do have a question about when we should do an experience study, right? Because it's been several years since these plans we've done a real experience study, and I think we've probably come up upon the time where we should. Do you have thoughts about that and how, whether or not that's something that we should do this next go around?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's it's been about probably 6 or so years, maybe 6 or 7 years since you've last done one. GFOA best practice is to do one every 5 years, so you're slightly past that time. But I think now is a great time to do that. You know, we've been seeing, especially on the pension plan side, we've seen some gains due to demographic experience not quite lining up with the assumptions. So we want to probably take a closer look at that and make sure that the assumptions are appropriate. The assumptions we make, any assumption changes we make, recommend, and you adopt to make will impact both plans. So I think we want to look at the impact on the liability for both plans as part of the study.
Great. Would you be kind enough to kind of draft up kind of what kind of an estimate
Sure.
cost of that, so we can
certainly.
move forward with that? Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. That's it. Thank you very much. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it, Jen. Good luck with the Board of Finance.
All right. Take care. I will see you guys in July. Bye-bye.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Good. Moving along.
How often you get that number just right?
Yeah, I know.
Right?
You don't really think you always come here, they usually dance around it. Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right. With that, Brian, I'm going to turn it kind of over to you. Item 4 is an opportunity to review principal.
Sure, and I just saw that Michelle and Brent joined from principal, and so I'll let them carry it away. It's, you know, we've done this the last few years, just an annual update and hearing directly from the managers. And It's always been good for the JRIF. And so, we invited them back in. Things are a lot different than they were last year, but everything is. And I'm sure Brett and Michelle can give an update to that. So I'll turn it over to you, Michelle.
Sure.
Can we-
Just a quick sound check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Brent, do you want to say a quick hello and we'll just do the same?
Yeah, good evening, everybody.
Okay, good. I will share my screen and thanks. I'm standing in for Paul Stover, who you work with more regularly. I have the privilege, both because I've worked with Brian for many, many years back in our GE days together, and also as a former Wilton resident, so just down the road from you all. It's great to see you, and thanks for taking time. One of the things I wanted to just start off the meeting with was saying thank you. You guys have been an investor with us since 2012. And over that time, we're grateful that we've been able to outperform for you. The fund has actually outperformed the Odyssey on a net basis, the Odyssey being gross, but on a net basis, we've been able to outperform for you by an average of about 323 basis points for the 10-year period ending December. So we're really grateful for that. We're grateful to be working with you. And yeah, a lot has changed. You'll probably notice many of our sector and geographic exposures tonight are not a lot different, and I'll let Brent talk about that. But I thought it might be interesting for you to just to take a step back to when you first invested with us 10 years ago. The sectors themselves, the exposures, the composition of the index has changed a lot. So 10 years ago or so, for example, office represented about 35% of the index. Today, it's at 23%. Industrial has seen the biggest change, no surprise there. 10 years ago, it was about 14% of the index. Today, it's 31%. So you've seen some really big moves in that. And I think the fund and Brent and the team have reacted and proacted, I guess, accordingly to deliver that returns for you. So we look forward to a really good discussion tonight. I won't spend time on principles since you've already met with us. And Brian did give us a preview directing us to spend no more than 15 minutes in prepared comments, allowing for some Q&A. So please interject as you can. But he did say initially it would be good for us to touch specifically on going forward projections, where we see things, where we're positioned for the fund, and also to touch on inflation. I imagine you might have some other questions, and I just wanted to see if there's any that you wanted to have us focus on at the outset before I turn Brent over to talk about the fund.
Cool.
I did have a question, Michelle, and no need to address it right now, but given the volatility of markets recently, I think I speak for more than one person on the board. We'd be interested in knowing about how you maintain markets and honor requests for liquidity and that kind of thing from your other or all your investors, and any comments about the stickiness of funds, the not so stickiness of funds, that kind of thing would be interesting to hear from you.
Okay, great. We'll definitely address redemption queues, investment queues. Anybody else? What's sort of front of center that you want to make sure we address at the outset? Okay, well,
Nope,
we'll
I
dive
think
in.
that-
Oh,
Okay.
go ahead.
No, I said
Okay.
we'll jump in as we go.
That's great. I'm going to try to share my screen, so hopefully this works out. And I'm starting with the fund profile page, which for those of you that have copies, it's page 15. Can you let me know when you can see that? Then you all disappeared on me.
Yep, we see it.
Okay, great. And if you'd like to start somewhere else, go for it, but I'll leave it over to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. Again, Brent Heemskirk, one of the portfolio managers for the Enhanced Property Fund. We've spoken in the past, so it's good to be back, and thanks for having us again. I thought I'd just do, in the trying to be brief with my comments, kind of three main things. Quick review of 2022 and kind of where we sit today as that backdrop, and review kind of how 22 went and where that sits us today. Go over a little bit of fund positioning relative to a lot of the comments that Michelle opened with, kind of how the portfolio is positioned today, which is not a whole lot different than it was a year ago, but and talk through some of our thoughts on the property sectors. And again, as we think forward looking, how we think we're positioned. And then kind of close with some recent market updates and what we're seeing in terms of the market, kind of that last question on volatility, and certainly try to answer the questions that were posed. So we'll be brief in his comments. And again, as Michelle said, please jump into questions as I get going here. But as you think back to 2022, last piece, do not anticipate going through all these slides. So if there's anything you want to talk about specifically, point me to a slide, we can do that. But we'll probably just go through the 4 property sector slides, and you leave the rest as background for you guys. So to start with, let's maybe think back to 2022 and how performance was. I would characterize it as a really strong first half of the year, second half of the year, much more choppy. And that was really due to both the magnitude and the pace of the Fed increases. I think coming into the year, or early 2022, we would have told you we expected about 100 basis points of rate increases. Instead, we got 400 basis points. And what that did was it caused market disruption. It slowed the transaction market for sure. We saw buyers reconsidering their underwriting metrics, us included, and their return requirements as well. And that really caused a bid-ask spread between buyers and sellers again, and that really ground the transaction market to a halt. From a return perspective, Michelle touched on some of the outperformance we've been able to achieve, but we finished last year, 2022, at 8.1% gross. Again, yeah, thanks, Michelle. That was really, front half loaded. We certainly saw returns moderate considerably in the second half of the year. And we do expect that moderation to continue in the early part of 2023. Again, don't have quite the full first quarter picture, but generally the similar trends are playing through, and that's prior to sort of the last week and a half of bank volatility. That was full year 2022, the 12th consecutive year of outperformance relative to our fund benchmark. So strategy has been able to achieve consistent, strong returns. Michelle mentioned you've been invested for, I think, 10 years. We've outperformed an average of 323 basis points each year of that time frame. Then the other thing I mentioned, kind of that reduction in returns in the second half of the year. The other thing we saw in the second half of the year, especially because of the first half of the year returns, the disparity between private real estate returns, which again, through mid-year last year, we were up 15% or so, versus other asset classes, caused a denominator effect for a lot of investors. And so we did see redemption requests start to come in towards the end of second quarter, certainly in third quarter and fourth quarter. And with that volatility, we did implement a redemption queue at the end of third quarter. So we did not pay redemption requests at September 30. We also did not pay them at the end of the year. We also did not call capital at those times. So both inbound and outbound dollars were sort of frozen at that time. So we ended the year, specific to answer the redemption queue question, at $266 million. That's about just over 8% of NAV at year end. So far in first quarter, again, we're not all the way through first quarter, but so far in first quarter, we've only seen 2 small redemption requests, less than $2 million total. So really has ramped down here in first quarter and calmed down. Again, did see some volatility over the last 10 days or so. And I would tell you that in terms of first quarter perspective, most of those redemption requests do come in the last few days. So we're not quite out of the woods yet in terms of what we'll see for first quarter, but to date in first quarter has been pretty muted in terms of redemption requests. The flip side of that, yeah.
Did you have any redemptions in Q3 and Q4 that you said you had closed that window that were sitting there pending that you didn't pay out?
Yes, we did. So ones that came in second quarter, we did not pay in third. And then we saw additional requests come in third and fourth quarter that we did not pay at year end. We haven't quite made the decision of end of first Q payment yet. But we'll probably say it's a long shot that we'll be paying redemptions here at the end of first quarter. I think if you would have asked me that 2 weeks ago, probably a decent chance we would have paid something. Probably a small percentage. Haven't made that full decision yet for the end of first quarter, but with the increased volatility over the last 10 days or so, 2 weeks, I think it's more likely we maybe don't pay anything again here at the end of first quarter.
Can you give us a sense of what those redemption requests were last year in terms of dollar amount or percentage of the portfolio?
Yeah, so end of year ended at just over 8% of NAV. To give you
Okay.
a little sequencing of the quarters there, kind of a timeline of that, we saw about $96 million come in right at the end of second quarter. That, again, that was payable third quarter. We did not pay. We saw just over 100 million during third quarter. That becomes payable at the end of the year. And then during fourth quarter, we saw about 75 million. That roughly adds up to the 266 that I mentioned. And then so far this year, very small, 2 minor, less than $1 million each redemption requests. So have not seen much activity at all so far in first quarter.
Okay, yeah, sorry, you had mentioned all that, sorry, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. It's a lot of numbers to keep track of, so that's, don't mind that at all. I should mention.
I'll mention,
Yeah,
we
go
are
ahead.
still paying the dividends. That's so you all received I think a notice of that yesterday. So we are still making dividend payments, but we aren't paying out redemptions, just to distinguish that.
Yep, great point. Thanks, Michelle. I think the other thing that we like to point out, or is worthwhile to point out there, so we do have an outbound dollars waiting to be redeemed. We also have an inbound queue at the same time. In fact, so the outbound queue, I said, totals 266 million, or roughly 8% of NAV. Our inbound dollars waiting to be called is actually $512 million. So that's just over 15% of NAV. So we do still have dollars waiting to fund. We have investors who want to join. Most of that, again, was kind of pre or first half of 2022. Those relationships, as Michelle can speak to, take a lot of time and effort to sort of win those mandates. And so we've been in communication with those clients as well, talk them through sort of the volatility we're seeing in the market, and anticipate. I think the end story there is once we do feel good about kind of valuations and start paying out those redemption requests, I think we could extinguish that queue pretty quickly because we do have dollars waiting to come in as well.
So Brent, if
Clarify,
hypothetically there
it's
were
really about, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Brent, if hypothetically there were a mismatch, or Michelle, whoever would be responsible for this area, between redemptions and new allocations, do you have corporate lines you draw on? You're not driven necessarily to sell properties to honor net redemptions, correct?
We do have private placements, but you're right. We won't be forced to sell. That's part of the deal with the fund and making sure that we can protect the interest of the investors in the fund. So there's no forced selling to meet those redemption requests.
And to be explicit,
does that answer your question? I don't think I did.
To be explicit, when you say there's no forced sale of properties, what is the source of the cash that allows you to honor net redemptions in a given quarter? I'm just wondering how this works mechanically.
Yeah, it's a couple things. It's cash flow off the properties. That is generally going towards the dividend, and then it's sale proceeds of assets, and that's, again, sort of comes into the reason for this kind of freeze of outbound dollars. It's that volatility in the transaction market, and the repricing we're seeing with really across sectors, but especially in a couple of the harder hit sectors, where that sales certainty is in question right now. And so until that we feel more comfortable about the certainty of close of a few of those assets, and we probably got a couple sales across the finish line, we have the ability to gate those redemptions.
Okay, great. All right, so at the risk of sounding like naive capital, your gate policy gives you comfort that you're not going to be honoring redemptions under stress. You can sort of wait it out until markets stabilize, dust settles, to mix metaphors, and pay a fair amount for a given market condition.
That's extremely well said. It's exactly the reason. It's really for the protection of all the other underlying investors. So yeah, that's extremely well articulated.
It's good to hear you say that, even if thank you very much for saying that.
I think the other thing I would say about 2022 is I mentioned some of that choppiness from a transaction market perspective, some of the negative return in fourth quarter. From an operation perspective, the underlying property is still really a very strong year in 2022. We had strong occupancy and good leasing results, especially in multifamily and industrial. Again, as I go through the property sectors, you'll hear me talk about the strength of those sectors. Overall, we saw 13.7% same-store NOI growth. Michelle's brought up the slide here, some of our history there. And she reminded me right before this call that when we talked in April last year, we had projected just over 8% same-store NOI growth. So pretty strong outperformance from that metric. And we project pretty strong NOI growth going forward as well. That NOI growth was driven across all property types, certainly the strongest in multifamily and industrial, but we did see positive returns and positive income growth in office and retail as well. Even with that really strong NOI growth, that resulted in only about 1% of overall appreciation for the year. And so what we saw there was really capital market adjustments, again, as interest rate hikes kind of filtered through the system, mentioned some of those valuation, discount rate and exit cap changes, outweighing the strong income growth that we saw throughout the year. So that was kind of the story of where returns came from in 2022. I thought I would talk about fund positioning next, go through the four main property types here. First one here, so these are in order, they're kind of, all the slides are oriented the same way, but they're in order of largest to smallest allocation within the portfolio. Mentioned not a whole lot of change here year over year from a year ago when we talked in terms of what we're overweight or underweight to. Still have, I think at a high level, the portfolio position where we want it, overweight to multifamily, overweight to industrial, underweight to office, and slightly underweight to retail as well. So the first slide here is the multifamily sector, our largest exposure at 38% relative to 29% for the index. Really tremendous performance for the multifamily sector in 2022. Mentioned really strong NOI growth. Traditional multifamily saw 29% NOI growth in 2022. So you talk about real estate being a good inflation hedge. Multifamily is probably the best example of that. The ability to reset those rents year over year. Very, very strong performance across our multifamily portfolio. Finished the year with our stabilized properties at roughly 95% occupied. So very, very strong occupancy and good leasing results. So far, at the end of the year and then early in 23, we are seeing some slowdown. Again, not that tremendous rent growth we had seen last year. Some moderation. Now that's not uncommon in multifamily. The winter months are traditionally it's a little cyclical. And so we'll be keeping a close eye on if we kind of ramp back up to strong, income growth and occupancy levels. But keeping a close eye on some markets where there's some supply in multifamily. But the overall comment here is, we'll continue to like and want to remain overweight in multifamily going forward. We're going to pick our spots very carefully. I think as we see some repricing in the market, there's a chance for us to achieve, kind of value add or almost development-like returns with taking less risk. The last few years, we've done a lot of value add and development opportunities within multifamily and industrial. Those have been very lucrative. As we see some repricing and construction costs rise, I think there could be some opportunities in the stabilized portfolio to achieve some outsized returns as well. Next slide is the industrial sector. Again, Michelle mentioned very, very strong performance the last few years in the industrial sector, really driven by e-commerce. 35% of the portfolio overweight to the index. This is one where our real estate research team had us overweight for a number of years. A lot of the years you guys have been invested with us, we've been overweight to industrial because of that research team getting us to the right place. We've certainly benefited from that. We've seen the Odyssey allocation kind of tick up quarter over quarter and kind of catch up to us, but we're still overweight. We've benefited from the overweight position for a number of years now. Picking our spots carefully here, the last year we saw over 13.5% return in industrial. So very strong performance. I think that will moderate again a little bit here in 2023, but the underlying fundamentals are still very strong. We're seeing good tenant activity. We're still seeing strong leasing results. Our industrial portfolio is at 97% occupancy. Really the only available spaces we have in the entire portfolio are a couple of recently delivered development projects that are in their initial lease up. So any time anywhere we have space, we've been able to lease it, and it's been a very strong performance for us. So want to remain overweight, but keeping a close eye on supply. Haven't seen too much of a slowdown from a leasing perspective, and so would anticipate this continue to be a strong performer going forward. But costs are rising. There's a lot of economic turmoil out there that will certainly could bode or have some headwinds to the industrial sector. But feel good about where we're positioned today from an industrial sector perspective. The other thing I'd like to mention here, as we look at some of the NOI growth and where we've seen rental growth, as we look at our portfolio today, we think we're about 20% below from a contract rent perspective where market rents are. And so, over the coming years, as we have rollover, we get access to those spaces. I mentioned the strong leasing results. Should be a strong income growth performer for us, as well as we market some of those spaces to get those renewal rents up, and any time we have new space available to get new market rates.
What's the length of a lease period on average?
Yeah, it really depends. It's interesting from an industrial sector perspective. Historically, you wanted longer lease terms, and so 5 to 10 year industrial leases were kind of the norm. From a landlord perspective, with the strong rental growth and what we're see from rental rates, landlords are actually preferring a little bit shorter lease terms, and so you're seeing more 3 and 5 year deals pushed from a landlord perspective. So it's decreased over the last few years that landlords have pushed for less lease term, which is historically different than we've seen over the longer term track record of industrial leases. The other thing we're seeing in industrial leasing, historically, those annual rent increases, that the rent bumps contractually in the lease would be 2.5%, maybe 3% from an annual growth perspective. With the inflationary environment, and again, the shortage of space, landlords have been able to push 3.5%, even 4% annual increases. So we're getting that on most of our new leases today, and feel pretty good about kind of the growth inherent with those new leases.
Are you concerned about mortgage maturities and refis in obviously a turbulent financial market?
Yeah, absolutely. Michelle, if you want to go to the debt slide. So this is a question we're getting a lot. It's towards the end of the deck. Yep, a couple more right there.
Page numbers as you go through. Some of us are following along on our.
You bet. 27 is the debt maturity slide. So the question for the group was, are you concerned about debt maturities? And so you've got our debt schedule here. So a couple high-level comments. Most of our debt, 66% is fixed rate obligations. And so no interest rate exposure there in terms of a rising interest rate environment. The floating rate debt, 34% of overall debt, we do feel those increases. And so that goes kind of directly to the bottom line. The question you asked was, do we have concerns about refinancing? And the answer is yes. You see this big bar here on the left for 2023 maturities. I think it's important to kind of go through these and tick through kind of how we're thinking about these for 2023. I think we're in a pretty good spot, but it's probably worth mentioning what we have expiring here in 2023. So that is 9 different loans expiring in 2023. The first of which is a $108 million loan that is tied to a student housing asset that we have under contract to sell. So that one will be paid off when we sell that asset. We've got hard money down on that. So that takes a nice chunk of that 437 away right away. The next, call it $100 million, is 4 loans where 3 of them we're going to market for sale. That's a student housing asset, a multifamily asset, and then a retail asset where we've had pretty strong leasing success. Those are property sectors where we feel pretty good about the execution. Even with the volatility, there's still buyers out there for multifamily. The retail center has a really good story. And so we've matched kind of the asset and liability together there, where the business plan allows us, they're well leased assets. We think there'll be a market for them to extinguish those debts with payoffs at sale. So that takes about $200 million off of that 437. Then we've got 5 more loans that are towards the back end of the year that we either have extension options that we qualify for today. That's an office asset where it would probably be challenging to get refinancing today. Not a lot of debt appetite for office projects. And so that's one where we qualify for an extension. I think you'll likely see us extend on that one, unless we can, we think we can get a buyer for that office asset. And then we've got 2 more multifamily, a retail and an office asset. The 2 multifamily assets total about another $100 million. Those, again, we qualify for extension options. I think you'll likely see us, extend those for longer maturities. And then that leaves 2 more, a retail asset and an office asset that, we're probably a little uncertain on what the appetite will be from a debt market perspective. So those total, again, just under $100 million. We've reserved cash in our kind of 2023 cash flow projection for the ability to pay those off if we need to. And so that bar on the left there looks large. We've talked through this kind of maturity schedule with a number of clients. We feel pretty good about it. Certainly, it's a challenging environment in the debt space. There will be a rise in interest costs. That 4.4% you see circled at the bottom of the slide, that was 4.1% a couple quarters ago. So we continue to see that go up. I think that'll continue to go up here in early 2023 as well. But generally feel pretty good. I think as we look across our competitive landscape, the 66% fixed rate loans, a lot of our competitors, that would be a reversal. You'd see a majority of floating rate debt. And that's been really accretive over the last few years. Again, the downside to that is when rates do rise, and if they rise quickly, you're exposed there. And so feel good about our exposure there for the most part, but there's no doubt it will be challenging in the near term to refinance some of these properties.
So I assume the gate will protect you until the dust settles on the debt refi as well.
Yeah, in terms of a usage of cash, yeah, that frees up a little more cash for us, to the ability to refinance if we want to. Again, the way to think about that is we do have dollars waiting to come in, and so when we do get to a place where we want to or want to redeem capital and also call capital, those inbound dollars waiting to come in gives us some flexibility to pay off some of these loans as well.
Brent, do you have a slide on your collection rate? Have you seen any collection rate stress in Q4? And I know it's Q1.
Yep, great question. We don't. We did put a collection rate slide kind of during the heat of COVID, the latter part of 2020, where we saw some retail tenants stop paying for a while. We really have had no collection issues since that time frame. We had a quarter or two where we worked with a number of retail tenants specifically to kind of keep the lights on, if you will. And then we were pleasantly surprised into 2021 that really all of that kind of reserved debt or back payment of rent, we actually were repaid at the majority of it. From a fund perspective, you kind of write that balance off and assume you're not going to collect on most of it. So again, from a collections perspective, the challenge we had, or the time where we really took a close look at that, continue to monitor it, but we don't have any issues today. And so we don't have that slide in the book today. And the answer for that is a good reason. It's because there really is no collection issues across the portfolio today.
Can you go back to that other slide, just a second? So just on the debt maturities for 2023, how much does the kind of this most recent kind of volatility in the banking sector kind of influence kind of your thought around timing of your ability not only to be able to to sell these properties, but to line up a buyer on the other side who can access credit in what's likely to become a harder environment for them to gain access to that credit?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's certainly probably the biggest concern we have today. It's the last 2 weeks it was already a challenging lending environment. Debt capital is scarce, it's expensive. I think what we've seen over the last 2 weeks only exacerbates that. And so, most lenders have already really no appetite for office properties. We know those are going to remain challenging going forward. I think with well-leased multifamily and industrial, you can still find financing. It's going to be a little more expensive, but you can still find financing. Retail is doing okay, and probably there's some lenders out there for retail, although we haven't seen a ton of transactions. But the thing that comes to mind, I was listening to a podcast on the way in this morning, and they said debt is the lubrication of the commercial real estate industry. And I thought, I've never heard someone say it that way, but it's a great point. It kind of grinds to a halt that transaction market. When debt, capital dries up or it becomes more expensive, it's kind of slows everything down. And so to your point of, does that give us concern about getting some of these sales done? It does. It absolutely does. I think as we look at our 22 or 23 maturities, we have options for those that if they for some reason weren't to sell, where we can either extend longer. There might be a few of them we need to, kind of bite the bullet and either pay off and hold them all cash, or refinance at a little bit higher rates. And we're prepared to do that with properties that we feel good about holding.
So is there a point in the year when you're gonna feel like this is all behind you? Or does it kind of go right to the end of the year? Is there a timeline, including some, red letter dates that, you're concerned with, and then you'll feel okay after those pass successfully?
Yeah, it's a great question. My crystal ball doesn't go up as far as it used to, especially sitting here today with what we've seen again, the last 2 weeks. So no, this is something that we're going to continue to monitor kind of, day by day, week by week at this point. I think the response we've gotten from the Fed and backstopping some of these banks, it doesn't feel like it's systemic at this point. But it only takes a little bit of kind of knock to investor confidence to shake up the market and kind of keep things uncertain for a while. So I think we feel pretty good about where we sit today. We would like things to be kind of calmer going forward. Certainly, I think every investor would say that. I think the underlying fundamentals of the majority of the property types make us sleep pretty well at night. Multifamily continues to have very strong occupancy. Industrial is very strong. Office is the one that's the big concern. I didn't get to that slide, but we've really reduced our office sector allocation significantly over the last 5 or 6 years. It's just 12% of the portfolio from a traditional office perspective. We've got some life science and medical in there as well. That makes the slide a little bit larger, but we've really reduced that office allocation perspective. And so, the long-winded way of answering your question is I think it's a week by week thing at this point. Now we'll have the decision to make in terms of, you talk about red letter dates. We can decide all the way up to the end of the quarter about payment in terms of paying out redemptions. And so I think we'll continue to kind of sit and assess here day by day, frankly, and see how the market's reacting. And then, I do think long-term, the good thing about private real estate is, we have assets in good locations. We don't have a ton of rollover in the next couple of years. We've got tenants that are paying rent to the collection, question. And so I think we're in a pretty good, spot to kind of weather the storm. The flip side of that, I look forward to, kind of more exciting news is with some of this repricing, we think there's going to be some opportunity for some pretty attractive buying opportunities. And so that's where having that inbound capital kind of waiting to come in when we think it's the right time to, call that capital, should give us some dry powder to take advantage of some investment opportunities as well.
For that inbound potential of calling in, right, plus you have a line of credit, $160 million, is there a concern that if, it gets more challenging ahead that, the funding investors won't have the capital to put into it? And and as well as the banking lines being reduced as they, at times in the past have, there is a consolidation or issues of banking that the lines of credit could be reduced.
Yep. Yeah. So we've got, as you know, we've got a $160 million line of credit. Have not called or have not tapped any of that, so it's fully available today. It's worth noting that line of credit is there's 4 banks associated with that. Those are all 4 national large banks. I would say, if anything, they're probably a benefit from or are seeing more deposits from the volatility over the last couple of weeks. So in strong position. Could that happen? Sure, it's possible. I would say that's probably a remote possibility. They would be very different types of banks than the ones that have been in the headlines the last few weeks, and so we feel pretty confident about that. Could investors, sort of choose not to fund or say, hey, we don't have the capital anymore? It's possible. Michelle, not sure if you have, thoughts on that in terms of what we've seen in past cycles or how we feel about those clients' funding.
I was going to mention 31% of the investors in this fund are from outside the United States. So not everybody is facing the denominator effect that many U.S. investors are facing. And I know 200 of that is in the queue. The investment queue is from a large investor from Asia. We're also, believe it or not, getting inbound calls still for investors interested in looking at the fund from Germany, where that capital tends to be very patient and tends to be somewhat countercyclical. And we're also getting calls from the Middle East where the investors don't have the denominator effect by and large. So that investor base, or the diversity of that investor base alongside your capital, is another form of protection. Nothing makes anything bulletproof, but we do appreciate that diversification.
And for the
We've
line
never
of
had
credit,
an investor default on their commitments to date. So, and we are trying as hard as we can to communicate so that there's that trust built up. We have told investors, don't fund yet. We're not going to call yet. I think that builds up credibility with those who then will be funding.
and the line of credit, the 160, that's just for this fund. You have obviously other funds in your organization.
Correct.
And they're all with the same 4 banks, or the other funds also have other banks? So you're not having a significant concentration with one bank being, and are all the banks, are any of them international banks? Obviously ours sounds like they're all domestic banks, but the large banks too big to fail.
Yeah, these are all domestic banks in that line of credit.
I think we shared with you all, or at least I know Brian probably shared, but in terms of exposure to the banks that have been in the major headlines lately, we have pretty minimal exposure within the fund, essentially a $2.6 million line of credit. I'm sorry, not line of credit, a letter of credit for the tenant, where we don't anticipate even needing that as an asset or as a contribution, but it's pretty small. So, but we are watching that very closely. Nearly daily meetings on that exposure question.
Just to be explicit, you're talking about Silicon Valley Bank, Credit Suisse, or Signature Bank, or somebody else?
Yeah, that's right. So the ones on our kind of a longer list of watch lists, and then the ones that have been most keenly under watch or under scrutiny are Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic now, Signature Bank, and then Credit Suisse.
All right, so those are the 4 banks you're talking about when you talk about the 2. Among those banks would be a $2.6 million letter of credit.
That's right.
Yeah, so we have absolutely as you can imagine, we've had a lot of questions about those banks and kind of our exposure to them. So this fund we don't have any of those banks as tenants in any of our properties. We don't have any loans with any of those banks. The only thing we do have with SVB is one letter of credit that backs a tenant lease, which we'd only be able to call if that tenant were to default. That tenant is doing fine. We have no plans to call that or need to call that at this point. And then that tenant also is required, with what's going on with SVB, to move that to a different bank, which they're in the process of doing that already. So long story short we have we have no direct exposure and very minimal even indirect exposure to any of those banks, thankfully.
Excellent.
You want us to go back and cover anything else on the sectors or any other questions before we let you carry on with other business matters?
Can you go to like the responsible investing, property investing, page 34, just to give us an update on the initiatives that.
Yeah, more towards the back. Thanks. Yep. So this is something that's been inherent with this fund really since its inception in 2004. Principal has a long-standing track record of sort of ESG conscious investing. And so we certainly benefit from that in this portfolio. You can see some of our goals there. We, as an entire company, but then down into the asset management business and then down into our real estate funds, we've got some pretty aggressive targets for ESG reductions. So you see our 2035 targets there: greenhouse gas emissions, energy use intensity, water intensity, and some of our goals there. And so we're going to continue to kind of update investors with how we're doing along that. We've made a net zero pledge by 2050, and we've got some pretty aggressive targets from a 2035 perspective as well. So this is just us making sure we're being good stewards. It's something we've done for a number of years. It's certainly something we're getting asked about more and more over the last number of years. But PPF stacks up very, very well relative to our competition from an ESG perspective. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of reducing emissions.
I do want to
I realize
add
it's probably late.
philosophically, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I'm afraid you might have addressed this already and I missed it. I know you talked broadly about investor types in your funds. Do you have a slide in here that breaks, investors out by, institutional pension folks, maybe hotter money? Do you have a slide that talks about the nature of the investor? And where I'm going, of course, is I'm hopeful that the other investors in the funds are patient money like us, and they're not trying to play games and, sort of scam the fund by getting out at a propitious moment when, things have gotten rocky, but, the appraisal firms haven't caught up with it yet. You haven't caught up with it, not that you wouldn't, but hypothetically. Do you have a slide like that that basically describes your investor base?
I don't think we actually do, and I apologize. I should know this for sure. I can certainly follow up with the actual numbers we have. I have seen that slide if it's not in the deck today, but at a high level, it's a very small concentration of high net worth individuals. So the majority of this fund is pension plan money. It's corporates, and then we have a number of non-U.S. capital as well, which also would be 401k, retirement dollars as well. And so I can follow up with you on the exact numbers. I don't think we have it in this deck in terms of the breakdown, but to answer your question, it's a very small exposure to high net worth individuals. From a feeder fund perspective, it's less than 5% currently.
And I should mention that high net worth capital that's in this fund has chosen to be in this fund because it doesn't have a requirement to redeem 5% of NAV, the way that many of those other funds that have been out there are designed to do. So it's very sticky money. The fact I think that, and Brent went through those redemption queue requests, our job is to make sure investors understand what this fund is going to do, how we're going to treat investors, and then to communicate along the way. So I think there's good comfort from that perspective, but we'll follow up with Brian on the mix of investors, not just geographically, which I've gone through, but the types of investors that are in the fund as well.
And if hypothetically there were some hedge fund types in there, first of all, I hope there aren't any. And if you think, great, okay. Just when you say corporate, what does corporate mean, by the way, in this context?
Sorry, what is what?
I think Brian said that you had corporate investors in here. What does that mean exactly? Is that
mostly corporate defined benefit plans, public defined benefit plans. We have insurance companies. We have some endowment and foundations. We have some healthcare organizations as part of their long-term, somewhat quasi endowment type of capital.
Okay.
That's the majority of the composition.
Okay. And the last question here that I have, and then I think we'll have to kind of wrap up for the evening. Any turnover among the portfolio management team or the management committee of note?
No.
The team has remained exactly the same.
I'm trying to find this, the team slide. There you go. Yeah.
All the way to the front. Yep. Yep. So you've got Todd, Mark, myself, and Becky. Same as last year. A reminder: Todd and Mark have both been with this fund since inception back 2004. So, yeah, very, very stable, tenured management team.
Right. Thank you. All right. With that, hey, thank you very much for joining us. Best of luck selling those properties. Yeah, and
and refis.
And refis.
And refis. That's right.
But we
That's the tough part.
greatly appreciate your coming in and sharing with that as being so as candid and thorough. It really helps us a lot to maintain a good long-term focus.
Well, we appreciate all the questions and thanks for having us. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Oof. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that would be a good one to push today because, I scheduled this months ago because, last year we were communicating about the redemption queues and they're by far, not alone with most private real estate funds doing that. So any new news I get, I'll continue to pass through.
Thank you.
And then if I'm already looking out to, say, the April meeting, I was thinking of having HarborVest attend that one,
Yeah.
because we're still, to be frank, we're still waiting for more communication from them. Like our manager of research group's been talking to them almost daily, and I think we've been waiting to put something out until they have everything finalized. And if I started there, I think the main thing is HarborVest had, or still has, a line of credit with Silicon Valley Bank, just like many private equity funds. Once the FDIC and the government came in and said, okay, we're guaranteeing deposits over 250, a lot of that kind of concern went away. So each fund has its own line of credit.
Right.
But each of them were pretty small in terms of the overall net assets. And so the thing that I know that they're working on right now is replacing that line of credit with another lender besides Silicon Valley Bank, but everything is still there with them. But there's no concerns about the capital because of the backstops that the government's put in. So that's what they're just looking to work to replace.
Is the government picking up the responsibility for lines of credit?
No,
Okay.
it's just deposits.
Just deposit, I thought.
Yeah, but it's correct.
So if they've aligned with SVB, they're SOL.
I
mean, on that line.
No, the question was gonna be, or was outstanding with all this was, okay, well, Silicon Valley gonna say, okay, pay us back that line of credit, which would then mean, okay, they have to advance or speed up the capital
Okay, they have to
calls
provide
from
that.
their underlying investors.
Got it.
And so that hasn't been seen, like, they haven't sped up the capital call process.
Got it.
So they use the line of credits at banks, just like, maybe similar to Principal, is so that you're not constantly calling capital from your underlying investors. Use the line of credit to pay out to a general partner who's maybe investing in the fund.
I just
So,
realized
yeah,
the line was
there's-
drawn, that was the point.
Oh, yeah, the lines were drawn. I can give the specific figures, but they're. So that's the main thing that they're working on, is replacing the line of credit instead of Silicon Valley Bank with another big lender. I did send around, the exposure through the index funds to say Silicon Valley Bank and to Signature, and those were all pretty small. Like, so Silicon Valley Bank in the total stock market index, which is held, was 0.04%. It was 0.01% in the bond index. But, so we're still waiting for HarborVest to finalize things with their line of credit, and then as soon as we have it, we're communicating out to all investors.
Okay.
But I was planning to have HarborVest
It's a good idea.
come to the April meeting, because I know by then there'll be more information, but I'll hear directly from them.
Before we leave the topic, if you don't mind,
No.
Brian, how about the, Credit Suisse AT1s? Do we have any of that?
No, there was, well, in the Credit Suisse exposure, I don't know if it was the AT1s or just all exposure. So in the total bond index, the Credit Suisse was 0.08%
Okay.
of the total bond index, but I don't know what the breakdown would have been between regular debt or AT1. Yeah.
So it was, whatever it was.
So
it was
there's
small.
still, 0.08% in the total bond market, and there's 0.11% in the total international bond index. Yeah.
Everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's, it's interesting to hear from clients. Like last week, I was with the manufacturing company, and they have their exposure with regional banks, but as a precaution, the CFO was just pulling money and spreading it out to opening more bank accounts. Today, I had a meeting with a local bank that I manage the pension plan for out on Long Island, and, their feeling is like, this is not over. It was just, the amount, how fast it went, the increases, and that, people could pull and just put it into a 3-month T-bill and make 4%. They stressed the whole banking system. So their feedback is, they're upset, with the Fed and the way that they're still increasing rates. while our economists were still saying, you know, the Fed's gonna likely to increase, the CFO today was like, he thinks there'll be a rate cut by June. That was his prediction. That's one
Well,
thing.
we got 25
That's one
more
thing.
today,
We got
so-
24 miles today, but, you know, I could tell in their voices that, you know, they're stressed.
I looked at your broker CD platform today,
Mm-hmm.
and every tenor was over 5%.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Right,
I'm getting paid 0.1% at M&T Bank.
Right.
I told my wife, we can't get down.
right,
It's amazing.
yeah. So, yeah, that flight of capital, I know, you know, last year, you know, I don't know when that's happened before, you know, just because of how quickly the rates went up.
That's right.
And, you know, it's still higher, the rates are still higher in the short term.
Right. Right.
Um,
We've got, still remain having this very weird, right, inverted yield curve.
yeah, yield curve is still inverted, so, I mean, I kind of jumped ahead to like where our economist was, is our global chief economist still thinks that there's another, you know, quarter or 50 basis points through this year because of the inflation, issue. You know, the labor market is still tight. You know, where the impacts, or when you see the headlines, have been on the tech sector, a little bit on the real estate, maybe it carries through the financials, but that's where the weakness in the job market has been in those particular sectors, hasn't been broad-based. So if I'm glad to jump around.
Yeah.
Because it's worth hitting what's relevant.
Are you able to share your screen, or can we
I'm not
bring that up?
connected.
No, this is the one you wanted to bring up. Yeah. Hey, for those who are, so Kevin and Chris, do you want Doreen to pull this up on the screen, the Vanguard report, or would you rather that you can just look at it on your own and we just kind of talk to it? What's the easiest way to, most convenient way for you guys?
I have a local copy, so it doesn't matter to me, but if, you know, your call.
I do as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think there will be just some pages I'll highlight and jump to, so I, you know, won't go one by one, and I don't think I'll lose you. So if I skipped over the capital market performance and just kind of went to the pension plan, unless you...
Yeah.
I'm gonna start on page 4 because a good deal amount of the pension plan follows the figures that I'm on at page 4 because we're indexed.
I'm good.
Okay.
So this is calendar year to date. I'll give you some year-to-date numbers when we come to the plan, but so in the equity markets, U.S. equity and international equities were both over 4% through the end of February, and I think that was kind of predicated on a lot we're anticipating the Fed to cut at some point, you know, as we started the year, and so there was some kind of rotation back into equities. That's probably all being reevaluated, but even if I look through end of close yesterday, not today, but the total stock market index still up 4.4, the total international stock index through yesterday 3.09, so a little bit of weakness in international stocks given what's happening with Credit Suisse and the other banks. So that's a little reversal from February numbers with our page 4. The total bond market index, as yields have been coming down, that's up 2.06, and then the international bond index is up over 3.4%. So, and those figures are through yesterday. So despite the volatility, the returns are still been positive.
Mm-hmm.
So if I flipped over then to page 7, I don't have the plan performance through yesterday, but I have, if you're looking at fiscal year to date performance through the end of February, page 7 again, up 2.5%, and, you know, just slightly over the composite benchmark. So still positive, you know, that was up slightly from when I was here in January. That's mirroring with some of the figures that I just talked about. And the other piece that I would hit on is a little bit what Principal talked about, this whole denominator effect. We've slowly seen that go down within the portfolio. So if you're looking at the allocations, the bottom of page 7, if I just looked at real estate and private equity, we are 4.2% overweight, I'll call those the alternative sectors, private equity and private real estate. But that's down from being 5.6 overweight as of June of last year. So kind of two things happening, right? The public equity markets, public debt market's been increasing, and then the marks have been coming lower for private real estate and private equity. So probably the next time I'm here, we'll have the final numbers for end of year for private equity. Those are not reflected yet because they're on a lag. Principal gave an update, before they're officially into this report. They gave the numbers as of the end of 2022. So I just wanted to say, like, as far as that denominator effect or that allocation effect is, slowly going down within the pension and the OPEB plan, but more so the pension plan, because the OPEB hasn't built up its private equity. So those are the big numbers as far as the pension performance. The OPEB follows suit very closely. That's on page.
Before we do,
Yeah,
I always ask,
yeah.
the allocation.
To
Just in the pension, just the investment allocation, well, are we keeping the allocation? Do you see
Yeah.
any reason for us to make any adjustments?
I don't see any reason for two reasons. One is, if we just looked at just broad valuations in the markets, is everything looks fairly valued compared to our metrics. I don't know if I'll see if I included that slide in the back. The second goes back to the discount rate discussion that Jen was talking about. And so we've seen a big increase in the expected return of the portfolio over the last year as well. So I included that in the presentation. So on page 31, this is for the pension. So the expected return for this current allocation right now over the next 30 years is 7.26%. That's, I didn't write down where we were a year ago, but probably at least
100 basis points.
At least 100 basis points.
Yeah.
Because most asset classes were up about 200 basis points. So the expected return for the portfolio is it's 30 basis points higher than the discount rate. I think Jen's comment is a good one as far as not moving it around because these things change, right? I don't know how long it'll get there, but, the Fed is increasing rates in order to bring down inflation, but at some point, if you just look at the yield curve, they're gonna have to cut. The timing is anyone's guess, not that we're trying to do that, but, so I would say between those two pieces is why I wouldn't see shifting the asset allocation anywhere at this current point. Page 25 was I was alluding to, what do we think fair value is for these broad asset classes? Both equity, fixed income. We don't have it for privates, but most of these asset classes, again, looking at page 25, are in what we consider that fair value range. The most expensive asset class to us is still U.S. equities, still on the high side. And that's always why we have an allocation to international equities. We've talked about credit before. Even the investment grade credit looks fairly valued, but not in the sense of as you're going into a recession. So speaking from our fixed income team is like, that they're not adding credit exposure, even though it looks more attractively priced than a year ago because of the expectations, that we hit recession at some point. And when you have that happen, spreads usually widen. So I won't go to all the words on page 27, but I included page 27 only because these are from our fixed income team. What's their outlook on all of these particular sectors of the fixed income market?
I might have missed it, but can you say that your comments had changed his or her prediction of the likelihood of a recession? I think it was like 95% last time between now and the end of the year. Is that still at that very high level?
It's still at that very high level. I think the timing has shifted a little bit. Coming into the year, I think they were saying, second or third quarter. Then when you look at how strong the labor market has still been, they've been pushing that out to maybe, third or fourth quarter. So still highly likely to see a recession. but they were kind of pushing that out towards the end of the year. Now, so much has happened in the banking sector predominantly, and I think that brings up an interesting point, is maybe the economy will cool just because of the banking sector, and that doesn't force the Fed to have to put rates to 5.5% or 6%. And maybe that's better when you think about the discounting the cash flows for some of these companies, maybe that's better. But I think there's a lot out there, and I think there's just, the dispersion of projections have just gotten wider and just a lot less clear.
The commodity prices year over year have fallen precipitously. Oil, nat gas, LNG.
Right.
Lumber.
A lot
of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, energy has the energy prices coming down have to have a cooling off effect.
Yeah.
It affects inflation.
Correct.
The definition of inflation.
So, yeah, that was just those 2 points. And when I think about the asset allocation, I really always think about what's the discount rate, what's the likelihood of meeting that?
Yep.
And so those expected returns have really come up, and it's just the fixed income returns that have kind of moved the most.
Wow. Thanks. Okay. So OPEB?
And then OPEB is on page 13, slightly better than the pension with the slightly riskier profile, with more equity. So fiscal year to date for the OPEB, 4.94% on an absolute basis. And I talked about the pension was 2.51%. So the real estate allocation is kind of right in line there, and private equity hasn't been built up. Going back to private equity, I think the knock-on, and this will be good to hear from HarborVest, because I haven't heard this directly yet, but I think the knock-on effect of the Silicon Valley Bank, almost like what Principal's talking about, is what's the impact on all of these companies to be able to, the portfolio companies, not the private equity firms, but for the portfolio companies to access capital. So I think those are the things to watch, is what happens at the portfolio company level. And then also from the private equity company level, like, are they going to start to call capital faster than they would have if they had these lines of credit? I think those are the 2 big things to watch on the private equity space.
I would appreciate it too, if you would give some thought to whether or not we want to, you know, do another year of HarborVest, right? We've done 2 years, we've working toward our policy target. Each year we get another bite at that apple. Right? Given what you're saying and thinking about the availability of the portfolio companies to grow, HarborVest being the one that benefits from the most from the, HarborVest benefits where the whole tide rises, right? Because they're so broad, and they're so large. Would this be a good year to skip an allocation toward HarborVest?
I think a lot of investors are wondering about that, right? And so the other thing that I'll do in advance of the meeting is, like, you know, look at that cash flow pacing, right? You know, of trying to predict, okay, what would we have put in to try to hit that 10% target in a certain amount of time? Because you're right, you're trying to do that vintage year diversification, don't put it all in at once. And then what does it look like for a pause?
Yeah, especially with the higher rates, right? We've been doing that modeling with having no benefit from yield on the fixed income portfolio.
Right.
So now that we have a little bit of yield, right? Does that change the calculus, right? If you take a year off, it might not hurt you as much.
Right. So I'll certainly think about that in conjunction with the broader team. But that's a very fair question in this environment.
Yeah, and we typically make that allocation, we're on a schedule that we tend to do that in November.
Yes.
October, November, and this year, right?
But we did that the last 2 years towards, like, you know, had those discussions in the summer and the fall. Because usually the fund closes, you know, the second closes at the end of the year. But my thought process was, let's bring those conversations kind of up, given all the turmoil. And, you know, I think HarborVest spoke to us last summer, but let's have them speak to us at the next meeting, at the April meeting. And then, you know, that still gives us plenty of time to make that decision and see how the capital markets respond.
Okay, we've got,
Um,
what, 3 months left, 4 months left for the year, for
For
the
the
fiscal year?
year, right, you know,
I'm
so
rooting
it
for
would nice to see
2.5 percentage points on top of this, guys.
Yeah.
3 percentage points on top of this.
Could I ask, I'm just curious, Carol, based on your comments, do the portfolio companies depend as much on SVB as the actual portfolio, as the private equity, companies themselves? I would have thought that they'd be dispersed around the country and a whole motley crew of companies and getting
Oh, goodness.
financing from wherever.
Everyone was using SVB.
Even a lot of
Oh,
the
yeah,
portfolio
the
companies.
portfolio
portfolio
companies were the ones
companies, wow.
using SVB, because you could open an account, and they gave you interest, and what they would do, part of their business model was, even for startups,
Yeah.
total tech startups, was they would, if you had a bank account with them for X amount of months, you could then, they would give you a small line of credit in exchange for a few shares.
Okay, I think you're talking about venture capital, right?
Yeah.
But they
The
were
venture
talking about,
market.
like, how they were lending or, you know, thinking about some of these companies. So they were very exposed to the tech companies.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I think the short answer is yes, some of the companies are still dependent on credit
Yeah.
from, in this case, Silicon Valley Bank was the, you know, biggest lender there. Speaking broader just on the banking sector is, at least initial analysis, I mean, there's still gonna be stress in the system, but a lot of the failures seem to be kind of unique. Like Silicon Valley Bank, you know, they had over $100 billion come in cash flow, you know, while they were all flush, and they had just a complete mismatch of their assets and their liabilities, you know, so they invested those proceeds into long duration bonds, which of course got really clobbered last year. So without getting into it, it's like Silicon Valley Bank seemed to be somewhat unique. Signature Bank, that was very exposed to Bitcoin and that piece of the market. Credit Suisse, you know, there was kind of ongoing concerns about their governance and their risk controls. Like, they've been a weak bank and the share prices slid even before all of this. So it's not to make light of this. All these financial companies are connected in some way to the broader economy, but they seem to be somewhat isolated or unique cases in each so far.
Well, the good thing is, when these events do occur, they flush out a lot of this.
They do flush.
You know?
It is a flush.
Right.
It's a good cleaning of the system.
Well, what's scary to me is SVB, because Signature Bank, okay, crypto, that's just stupid. Credit Suisse, they've had problems forever and run a lot in Switzerland. But SVB, I mean, that's like the whole SNL crisis.
Yeah.
Like we didn't
Yeah,
learn.
yeah.
It's
That's
just
right.
an
That's
ALM
exactly
issue.
right. It's like
Right.
they didn't learn.
And if it didn't happen, if the problem occurred at number 16, you know, in the US,
Right.
how many other banks are sitting out there with the same ALM problem?
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, I'm looking at a chart that you don't have, like, it's not published by Vanguard, but their share was easily 2 times more than other banks. Like, you know, their securities as a share of assets, you know, the bonds they're buying were way over 50%. Other banks like JP Morgan, Citibank, Citigroup are less than 30. So like, they were so far outside of what any other major bank was doing or regional bank.
Yeah, for what it's worth, they were at 60% securities,
Yeah.
which is a proxy for, I think, mismatch, you know,
Yeah.
deposit
Yeah.
investment mismatch. And the next highest is, Bank of America at, what, just less than 30.
Yeah.
So it's a big gap.
I mean, you know, I guess the race is on with First Republic,
Yes.
right? Can they
Right.
save, because that would prove your thesis that these are kind of one-off, unique, management-oriented, not
Mhm.
systemic,
Mhm.
whereas First Republic, that would prove it might be more systemic, right?
And are these
Right.
only
They
the-
could not be saved.
Only the large banks?
No, there's some regionals in there as well, yeah.
I remember like this summer, there was like constant conversation on Bloomberg to, lighten the restrictions, to allow them to, invest more capital.
Barney Frank.
Barney
I
Frank.
know,
Barney
he's like,
Frank, John
John
Frank,
Frank, right?
man
Yeah.
himself.
Oh, thanks, yeah, I didn't realize that.
So,
Great.
Yeah, good old banking crisis, guys, we've been through a lot here together.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's a whole new era, you know, now that we have rates where they are and how fast. I think the fact that it happened so fast has been also part of the problem, even, you know, hearing what Principal had to say, right?
Yeah.
So, probably an understatement to say that it's just likely to be more volatility, you know, to what impact that it hurts earnings.
So let's talk about that for a second. So,
Mhm.
because I mean, I
Right.
don't want to take us off
Mhm.
tangent, but, so this will be the first time in 15 years since the great financial crisis that you now have to pull the balance sheet into your valuation, right? We haven't really had to,
Right.
If you think about the broad-based equity markets, and what's the valuation of the equity markets, right? Because the
Right.
markets fell out of love with PE and kind of went into EBITDA, right? So it doesn't pull in balance sheet management. And what we're seeing here now is the hazard of the mismanagement of a balance sheet.
Yes, as, you know, as far as the financials.
Right,
And
and
then the
so-
other big piece of that, which we saw
Real
last
estate,
year, was
which is debt,
tech companies,
yeah,
like,
but
so,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
debt maturities, right?
That was a big,
That was the whole
that was a
point,
scary number.
principle was the debt maturities.
Mhm.
And so when was the last time the equity markets did a thorough analysis of everyone's debt maturities, right? And, okay, it's simple, we'll just refinance it at a higher rate. Yeah, make double the rate, maybe, double,
If there's somebody there to lend them money.
if there's somebody there to lend you the money. And who's there to lend you money if the banks go through their risk tolerance?
Or maybe a lot more than double.
Or it could be a lot more than double. So it's gonna be very interesting to see how this all plays itself through. I mean, as a stock picker, I'm like, I now know where I'm gonna go looking, and you gotta go hunt through balance sheets.
Right.
But, regarding our exposure and why we're here, I mean, I think having that broad-based exposure
Yeah.
is very, it's a nice security blanket for us.
Right.
Building on that, could we have the same kind of discussion, or can you just maybe answer the question at a future meeting about the Gates policy of other managers that we have, where we illiquid assets is HarborVest?
It would just, it's really just principal in real estate.
Of course.
Because you can sell, there's no gate for private equity, but if you're selling into the market, like so for instance, HarborVest, which is part of the private equity fund, is secondary investments. So secondary investments, and that's why that's part of the diversified private equity fund through HarborVest, is, okay, a pension fund is over allocated or doesn't want any more and wants to sell it. So you can get out of private equity at any time, but you're likely going to take a big haircut and probably bigger in these points of time. So really, it's a long way of saying, really, principal is just the one that you have exposure to, say, redemption gates.
Right.
And that's not, it's not unique, that happens any kind of times of stress. You know, the other time that did happen was right around COVID, even with principal and other real estate companies, is, you know, put up a brief redemption gate. So that's the only exposure.
Yeah,
Okay.
because
Yeah.
we're at the very end of life of Mesereau and Lexington. Right, I mean, we're really kind of at the runoff
Right.
point of that, and then
Yeah.
in HarborVest, we've just begun.
Just begun,
Maybe
so
it's
you could think of that as,
Not with Mesereau.
Mesereau, we did,
We
we're,
have another,
well, there's
we
a
did,
there's a small,
there's a 2017 fund. So that was the last one to Mesereau into Lexington was 2017. So,
that's 7 years?
no, there was
No.
another allocation to Mesereau, wasn't there?
I'll look right now.
More recently?
Oh, it's in the presentation as well, but, I have that page. But no,
Unless we-
Mesereau was 2012 and 2017, then Lexington was 2009, 13, and 17. And this would also be found on page 10 of the presentation, where it gives all the information around commitment year, capital committed, capital called. So page 10 has all the figures and funds.
Yeah.
So that was, you know, going back now 3 years ago, why we talked about private equity is because that was gonna run off over time and fall below the 5%. Hasn't done that because of this denominator effect we talked about, and then slowly build into HarborVest, to not only stay at 5, but to get to a 10. So probably the silver lining is that there's been very little capital called on the HarborVest portfolios. So I'm sure part of their piece will be like, this is a good time for us to pick up, you know, more attractive valuations out in the market. you know, given that very little capital has been called in the 21
Mhm.
or the 22 fund. And in previous conversations, you'll probably have heard them say that some of their best returns has come in times of stress. You know, when they looked back in their 2009 and 8 vintages, those were some of the best returns that they had.
And then you talked about leading in at those times where, okay, everybody's fleeing the market, this is the time you'd be investing in, because you're getting better valuations, the
Yeah.
sellers on the other side have to sell.
Right,
And
yeah, that's
you're-
where it's so
Which
important
Which
to have.
we've already done, because we've already committed last year's funds
Right.
and the year before's funds.
Yeah,
So it hasn't
Which
been
are
in
just
deployed
deployed,
yet.
right, so
right.
we should be the beneficiary of exactly that thesis.
right, of them calling capital to invest during these,
Right,
during these times.
into those vintage funds.
Right,
And then the corporates and the corporate bond space, right?
Yeah.
Is there like, obviously during the COVID years, great time to refinance, when do these loans debt come due? Like this wall of debt, in those low periods of time, which even if it's a low numbers, let's say 2%.
Right, they're
Going forward, when you refinance the corporates now,
gonna roll up to higher numbers.
much higher.
oh, right, when the corporates.
That's what I mean, like, the balance sheet is
Balance
it,
sheet,
it's
yeah.
all about balance sheet analysis, it hasn't been about balance sheet analysis for a really long time. And it's gonna be all about balance sheet analysis. Yeah, remember? I do. You know that one. Wow,
Yeah,
All
so
right.
those at a high level, you know, the big updates, you know, just
uh-huh,
performance, principal,
Right.
Harvard Best, and there'll be more to come, yeah. So our next meeting is in about a month,
yeah,
April 26th. So,
right,
you know, we'll have first quarter of the year numbers by then, and then, an update from Harvard Best.
exciting stuff. All right, nice. I guess, guys, I mean, we've got next old business, new business. Anyone have anything they wanna, we don't have Jared here, HR, I mean, I think hopefully the Board of Finance is going well, covered a lot.
The only thing, if we could get Jen's slide deck.
Yes, I have that on my list, we need that. The Millman report, experience study, kinda wanna get them lined up on doing an experience study, for us. And we'll come back around to the clerical error and how we can best address and correct that.
Probably an update from Melman too about pension statements. That should be coming out July 1.
Okay. And then we'll have, in a future meeting, we'll have, we were gonna have Millman back in the summer because the transition should have occurred on their administration.
Doreen, if you get a fraction of tonight's meeting, I will applaud you. Tonight was a messy one. It's not
Okay.
usually this,
Everybody
Like-
kept saying, it's not a big deal, not,
this was a,
oh,
this was a
okay.
messy one.
This was a messy one.
Yeah.
And Doreen, I'm happy to review minutes, you know, for.
Yeah.
work
Perfect,
on the-
okay,
on the
I'm
HR
definitely
side.
gonna be listening to the recording again, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wouldn't wish that on anyone,
Mm.
to do all of that.
right.
She's been very calm.
Yes, yes. I mean, from,
Doreen's history,
Yeah.
how'd you end up here?
Actually, I was just looking in Patch, and I saw, the ad, just, you know, that you needed a new recording secretary, and I was like, oh, that sounds like a good way to get, you know, to, I don't know, a little more involved in the town. So I am originally I'm from New York, Long Island, actually, but I raised my children in Westport, so I was there for 25 years, and my husband and my girls and I moved to Fairfield about 4 years ago. So I worked for Merrill Lynch at that time here in Fairfield.
Oh.
I worked there for 4 years, and now I work for Foundation Source, also in Fairfield. So I help administer private foundations for people. So that's my background.
oh, wow.
Yeah, I have two girls, both in Manhattan now, graduated college, BIA. So, you know, that's pretty much.
Do they still have their
me.
rooms at home?
They do.
Yeah.
And they use them quite often, actually. I was just thinking, maybe you need to move a little further from it. They come home an awful lot.
We repainted. It helps.
That's good. Good
All of a sudden,
suggestion.
they've gotta clean the room up, because everything has to be moved, right?
That's a great idea.
It's a strategy to.
You have to have a strategy.
We're
You definitely have to.
repainting, you know, like
Oh, I made this my whatever craft
polishing the
room or.
floors.
We're subdividing each room
Yeah.
for,
Right, right.
Airbnb.
Close up their closets, that's another way you could probably,
You've
get rid
got
of
one
them.
kid out, one half out, and the other just lingering.
Never leaving.
Well, we painted her room. She's like,
That-
I'll clean it before you paint. Okay, good, come on, I'll
Yeah.
clean the room.
No, never happening.
Well, it'd be nice to have you. Yes, this one was a lot. This was a lot.
Oh, actually, that's good then, maybe get the worst over with.
Get the worst
There you
over
go.
with.
Okay.
Yeah, terrific. Guys, Chris, Kevin, you guys have been mighty quiet. I'm sorry I haven't called on you. Anything you wanna add?
All good.
Perfect.
All right, with that, I think we're gonna adjourn. Have a motion?
Motion.
All right, second, I think we're there. Good night, you guys.
Right.